In this video, we're going to be reviewing the Henry lever action 4570 side gate lever action rifle. This specific model is the H010G model, and we'll talk about some of the other alternatives in the market here today. Just a little bit of history about Henry. Henry Repeating Arms bought the original trademark of the Henry name, made famous by the Henry Repeating rifle back in the 1860s. They bought the trademark around 1996 and started their own business in New Jersey. Since that time, Henry has grown to become the leading manufacturer of lever action rifles, producing over 300,000 rifles per year. And they've become the top 5 long gun manufacturer in the United States since that time. Pretty impressive growth and record. They currently operate out of New Jersey and Wisconsin. They've won numerous awards for customer service. And when was the last time you ever heard of a firearms company earning those types of awards? So very impressive. They're also made in America with lifetime warranties. But the big news out of Henry came in November of 2020 when they announced that all their centerfire rifles will now include the infamous side loading gate. Prior to this, before this time, there was only tubular loading capabilities on a Henry where you had to pull out the tube rod and drop and remove rounds through the tube. Now you have the ability to be able to use the side loading gate with this as well. And this is one of the main reasons why I not only never bought a centerfire Henry, but also never reviewed one. Because the reality is I prefer to have side loading gates with my centerfire lever action rifles. And now we have that here today. So what are some of the pros about the Henry lever action 4570? So the first thing is the quality. The quality of the fit and the finish of the Henrys are just exceptional. If you've ever had a Henry, you know what I mean, right? It goes all the way from the bluing to the walnuts to the checkering on the walnut stock. I mean, it's just beautiful. All the finishes you can tell have gone through painstaking quality checks to produce an absolutely beautiful rifle. The other thing that I like is the fact that it shoots the infamous 4570 round, which is basically known to drop any animal within the North American continent. They also use a pistol grip styled stock as opposed to a straight style stock. And when I'm shooting lever action rifles, a lot of times I prefer to shoot the pistol styled stocks. It just makes operating as well as running the lever just a little bit smoother than a straight style stock, at least for me. It has slightly enlarged lever loop as well, which you're going to notice here. One of the things that I think some people did with lever actions for too long back to the John Wayne days was they made the lever loop so big that it became very cumbersome to efficiently run the lever action. However, today, this is actually a great compromise between the two. And by the way, my guns have been safety checked. This is a great compromise where you can have it just big enough so that you can have a large size hand as well as being able to run gloves as well with this. It also comes with semi-buckhorn sights with a front brass bead sight, which are excellent iron sights. It's relatively lightweight at about 7 pounds. It also comes with a ventilated rubber recoil pad in the rear, and the barrel length comes in at about 18.5 inches, which is about 1.5 inches shorter than traditional 30-30s. You're going to find that like the 336s and others that would come in around 20 inches. It also includes pre-mounted sling swivel studs on both the front and the rear. Another nice thing about having a side loading gate is now you can both load and unload through both the tubular gate as well as being able to top it off through the side loading gate. So this is kind of the best of both worlds. A lot of people like the fact that you could load from the top of the rifle and unload without having to cycle the rounds through the action, which of course you can do through the old Henrys and you can do through this one as well. However, if you're out in the field and you need to quickly top off your loads, that's where the side loading gate comes in. So now you really have the best of both worlds with the side loading gate. You're also going to notice that it doesn't have, for example, the typical Marlin hammer block safety that a lot of people don't like on the Marlins. Obviously, that isn't on the Henry. These are made in the USA, lifetime warranty, and of course, Henry has the best customer service in the business, and most people know that. Now, what are some of the drawbacks? Well, the first thing, as I alluded to earlier, it shoots the 45-70 rounds. These are expensive rounds to shoot. If you've ever shot these, you'll know this isn't a recreational round you want to fire a lot of just because they're very expensive to shoot. The other thing you're going to notice a little bit is the barrel finish is not as smooth as 1895. For example, if you run your fingernail over the finish, you can still feel a little of the machining grooves on here. It's not that it's bad, it's just not as nice of a finish as I do see on the Marlin 1895. Now, as far as caliber and capacity, as we alluded to earlier, the 45-70 government comes in typical grain ranges of 225 to 430 grain bullets, give or take. You can buy different powered loads also to help the manageability of recoil and what you need. However, the most common load out there is still the 405 grain load, which is the one I like the most. Looking at the 45-70 more specifically, it gets its name because it has a 45 caliber bullet with 70 grains of black powder. It was developed back in 1873 by the U.S. Arms Springfield Armory, and it had back then a muzzle velocity of around 1,350 feet per second. They also use the same load within the smaller carbines that the cavalry soldiers used to carry, and they used to download these a little bit to 55 grains that used to produce a velocity of around 1,100 feet per second. Now, one of the things you're going to notice about the Henrys is that they advertise that their tube magazine capacity comes in at 4 rounds, which I thought was a little odd considering it's the same barrel length as a Marlin 1895, which holds 6 rounds. So to test this, I actually put 6 rounds into the magazine and closed the tube, and voila, it holds 6 rounds. So I'm not sure exactly why Marlin advertises that it only holds 4 rounds, but the one thing I'm going to tell you is, at least for me, is that it holds 6 rounds in the tube. So if holding only 4 rounds is a problem for you relative to the Marlin, it's not a problem for me because it does hold 6 rounds in the tube. Now, as far as the action, as we alluded to earlier, is a typical lever action, slightly larger loop for bigger hands and gloves. As far as weight, it comes in around 7 pounds. Barrel length, as we alluded to earlier, is 18 and a half inches with a 1 in 20 twist barrel. Now, some of the accessories you can run on here include, for example, if you want to run a scope. So one of the things that I did here is I mounted on a Weaver. Now, the good thing with the Henry here is the Henry runs the same mounting platform as the Marlin 336, so which means the Weaver mounts are pretty prevalent in the market. The other thing I really like about these mounts is I'm able to see through them through the iron sight. So when I remove the scope, I still have 2 different sighting systems. So if I'm running this into a scabbard, I don't need to mount the optics on, and I still have an effective backup iron sight system. Or what I can do in this case is I can quickly mount and unmount my Weaver scope off of this mount, which again gives me 2 capabilities, which I really like. The other thing you might want to do, especially when you put optics onto a lever action rifle, is running what's called a hammer extension spur out the right hand side. Now, Grove Tech makes a spur for this. The number on that is HGTHM-283. I've got a link to it below. But one of the things I do like about this rifle, unlike a lot of my other lever action rifles, is there's enough clearance here where I don't really need to have a hammer extension spur when I run my scope on here. Now, as far as accuracy is concerned, one of the things that I did was I ran the same optics and the same loads that I did and the same conditions and even range that I did my testing for my Marlin 1893 on with the Henry. So in this case, I'm using a 2x7 Weaver microscope. Now, the first thing I tested were the iron sights, and the iron sights were dead on at 100 yards. So great quality iron sights. However, when I put on the scope is when I really kind of tested the accuracy of the rifle out. So the first groups that I ran were with the Black Hills, and this is, again, to keep it apples to apples of the 1895. I ran a couple different loads, but first one was the Black Hills ammunition, 45-74, 405 grain bullets, and this was at 50 yards, which was a little surprising to me initially. So what I did was I took that and I extended it out to 100 yards, and this is the type of group that I received. Now, this is not what I was expecting out of this rifle. And why is that? Because shooting the same optics off of my Marlin 1895, the exact same loads, these were the types of groups I was able to get out of these loads. So clearly I was shooting much tighter groups out of my Marlin 1895 than I was able to shoot out of the Henry. So the first thing I thought was, well, maybe the Henry doesn't like the ammunition. So I ran two different other types of ammunitions. I ran the Remington Core Lock right here, again, about a pretty similar spread. And then I also ran the Underwood Ammo 430 grain loads out of here. And you can see, again, I'm getting around the same types of spread. So I know it's not the ammunition, but rather the rifle. And again, when I compare these types of groups to the types of groups I was able to produce, the same optics, just a different gun, out of the Marlin 1895, clearly the accuracy is not on par with the Marlin 1895. And one of the interesting things about this is when you look back at the old trapdoor Springfield model 1893 days when they were firing, the minimum acceptable accuracy was 4 inches at 100 yards with iron sights. So this is a bit of an issue for me, at least insofar as comparing the results I got from the accuracy of the Henry as opposed to what I was receiving out of the Marlin 1895. Now, looking at this rifle, there are some alternatives out there. The first one, of course, being the Marlin 1895, which I alluded to earlier. I have links to the reviews below. The Marlin, of course, has gone through a number of issues. They were purchased by Remington Arms back in 2007. Of course, got the name, the post-acquisition name of Remlin. So the Marlin, Remington made Marlins, right? And that's where a lot of people were talking about the quality issues, which I talk about in my review as well. But they were just recently acquired by Ruger back in November of 2020. So I'm hoping that over time that Ruger will actually improve the quality aspects of the Marlin rifles. There are also other alternatives out there, including, for example, the 1886 Winchesters. They're higher cost, Japanese made, but they're really good qualities. There's other variants of the Henrys as well. For example, there's colored case hardened finishes, there's stainless finishes, longer barrels, straight stock, synthetic tactical stocks, Picatinny rails with rear peep sights, etc. And one of the things you'll notice on my review of the 1895 is I mounted one of these extended Picatinny rails on the 1895, and now they offer this on the stainless version of the Henry as well. And I had an option between this rifle as well as the stainless model. And the stainless model looks a lot cooler, but I'm more of a traditionalist. You know, I like the hardwood look. I like the blued steel. I mean, to me, this was more of a beautiful rifle than the stainless, which was a cooler looking rifle. But the other thing about the stainless was, at least the model I was looking at, included the integrated Picatinny rail. And one of the challenges I've always had with the Picatinny rails when you're running scopes are, it depends how you want to run your optics. So for example, as we talked about in the 1895, if you run a scout scope or a forward mounted scope, those are what are really designed for this Picatinny type rails. However, I don't personally prefer to run, I don't like running scout scopes on my hunting rifles. I prefer to run them back in the traditional area. And the challenge with the Picatinny rails are, because you have a peep sight coming up out of the rail system, oftentimes what it does is it requires that you have to mount the scope higher to clear the peep sight than normally I would want on a rifle. The only other option is to remove the actual peep sight from the rail and hope that you don't lose it, and obviously it doesn't stay on the rifle, which I would prefer it to stay on the rifle. If I want backup iron sights, I want them to be there on the rifle. So that's one of the reasons why I went with this option, because I really do like running a see-through system here. It's very non-intrusive as far as the Weaver mounting system. I can quickly off and on load my optics as well as shoot my iron sights through here. Now, as far as utility, what are these good for? These are great big game hunting rifles, right? We're talking about bear, moose, elk, deer, boar, you name it. It also comes out, the loads typically come out at lower velocity, which means it does not destroy as much meat on smaller games like deer, which a lot of people like it for that reason as well. And normally the 45-70 has an effective range of about 200 yards, which is about the same as the 30-30, but of course that's based upon the shooter's skills. It's not a long-range precision shooting rifle. So one of the three loads the 3 loads that I fired included, for example, as I alluded to earlier, the Remington core locks, the 405 grains. And one of the things I noticed here, just to give you an understanding of the drop here, if I have a 100-yard zero on the core locks, I found that my drop is almost 2 feet at 200 yards with a 100-yard zero. So it does have an effective range traditionally of about 100 yards in, but if you really do know your holds, you can fire these effectively out to 200 yards. There are also new ammunitions that are out there, for example, the Hornady Lever Evolution loads, which are designed to effectively fire out to 200 plus yards out of a rifle. Underwood also makes the Extreme Penetrators as well, which are lower grain, lighter loads that fire at much higher velocities as well. So you can extend the effective range of a 45-70 well beyond the old traditional days of shooting 405 grain loads. So, but back in the Springfield 1873 days, when you looked at what was the effective shooting capabilities of a 45-70, the Springfield 1873 days, a skilled professional shooter could consistently hit and through what's called volley fire, a 6x6 foot target out to about 600 yards. So a man-sized target would be about 300 yards. So really, back in the late 1800s, they were expected to hit man-sized targets out to about 300 yards. And really, you can effectively do that with these 45-70s if you have the right setups. So looking at the overall value of the Henry lever action, first thing is this is an exceptional value, and as you can tell, it is an absolutely beautiful gun. If you know lever actions and you fired them, you know that Henrys are producing the highest quality out there today, and it's no surprise that they've quickly become one of the top 5 long gun manufacturers and now the top leading manufacturers of lever action rifles. This is basically a quality alternative to what has become a declining quality firearms market. There has been so many great traditional names that have been changed over the years in ownership, and in many cases that has not led to increased quality, and Henry actually took the opposite path, and that's one of the reasons why people really love them. Another thing you want to consider, though, in the give and take, especially when it comes with the Henry, is if you value scope-mounted accuracy over quality finishes, you might actually prefer the Marlin 1895 instead. And the reason why I say that is this rifle, based upon the accuracy that I showed earlier in the targets, is good enough within about 100 yards, but I don't know if I'm going to want to shoot targets out past 100 yards with the accuracy I get out of this rifle. In that case, if I'm looking to shoot beyond 100 yards, I'm probably going to go with my Marlin 1895. So in the perfect world, I would have the Henry 45-70 with the finishes that you see here today, but shooting with the accuracy of a Marlin 1895. So if there's one area that I would suggest for Henry to improve upon, it's the accuracy out of this rifle. But again, beautiful rifle, and as you can see, now there's a side loading gate. So much like myself, if that was something that was holding you back in the past from buying a Henry, there's no more excuses. So that's a review of the Henry lever action rifle in 45-70 with the side loading gate. If you like this video or like our channel, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.